It's a cold, miserable day in October 1887. The rain is pounding on the pavement and the streets are eerily quiet. The only sound reverberating from the closely knit houses are the clip-clop of the horses' hooves. You look up to see a pair of black horses with black feather plumes on their bridles and black cloths covering their bodies. Everyone knows what those horses mean, and you take your hat off in respect. But what is unexpected is that the horses were not pulling just any old coach, far from it. They were pulling one of a handful of funeral trams. I have spoken about funeral trains before, and of course the necropolis was famous for it, but funeral trams were on the rails as early as many horse-drawn trams. In fact, tramways would factor in a stop or two at local cemeteries when planning the route. Victorians, for some reason, had an obsession with death. It's unclear why. Some said it was due to child mortality rates. Some said it was due to the Queen being in constant mourning, while others have attributed it to the fascination and awareness of science, our own biology, and morbid experiments on cadavers in attempts of understanding what life was and how to bring people back from the grave. Families treated death as important as life. Traditions were built around mourning, which we still hold today. Funerals became more elaborate and grand and were seen as the final show of the deceased's wealth. Hair was woven into mementos that the family would keep as a keepsake, and photos of the dead were taken, and the dead were posed as though they were alive alongside members of the family. Sadly for many children, this would be the only picture they would ever have and was a forever treasure for the bereaved family. On Sundays, it was tradition for Victorian families to pay a visit to the cemetery to see their loved ones, and the tramway companies would see the appeal of having a station close by. But the tram companies soon realised there was a hidden service that they could offer. With the roads to the cemeteries being nothing more than muddy tracks which were rough and ill-tended, they had the infrastructure and the means. Why not offer a hearse service? A traditional Victorian funeral would normally start in the home of the deceased. The coffin would have been brought home from the undertaker so families could pay their respects, and it was customary to have the last night before the funeral spent at home. Some Catholics spent their last night at the church altar with a priest standing over them. Depending upon the person's wealth and the means of the family, the funeral service would be undertaken either within the home or they would be taken to the local church. Once the church service was finished, they would be taken to the cemetery to be buried. Cremation was not typical back then, although some cremations did happen. Tramcars offered a solution where the coffin could be placed in a specially modified tram hearse. This has two benefits. The tram ride was smoother, and for the mourners, instead of walking on dirt roads, could travel comfortably in adjoining cars. While popular overseas and in America, in the UK, just one tramway offered its funeral service onto the public on a regular basis. This was the Great Orme Tramway in Wales. It is a cable-run tramway. Halfway up the summit of Great Orme sat St Tunnos Church. The churchyard was the principal place where the townsfolk of Llandudno found their final resting place. The way it ran the train was unusual. The railway used a passenger-converted car to take luggage, but it could also take coffins. If required, a second car was coupled with it, which was a standard passenger car, ready for mourners and those wishing to go on to the summit. When the halfway point was reached, a hearse was ready to take the coffin off the tram and into the churchyard. Although the UK did not offer a widespread service, there was a few notable exceptions to this rule. In 1901, the Dudley, Stourbridge and District Electric Traction and Kniver Light Railway wanted to honour one of its drivers, Martin Cadman. He drove his cab determined to get his passengers home through a fierce snowstorm. His open cab afforded him no protection from the elements, and when he finally got home in the early hours, he collapsed from heart problems and passed away. The company, touched by his dedication to the service, organised an old wagon and converted it to take his coffin. It was decorated in black and purple cloth and was placed in the centre of a three-car train. Over 2,000 people came out to view the cortege, and it ran the full length of the line, even over the unopened Kniver Light Railway, making it the first ever passenger service to grace its rails. The Kniver Railway continued its tradition with another service, this time in 1915, to commemorate the life of Reverend Ernest Hexel. Reverend Hexel was a huge pillar in the community and worked tirelessly to relieve the suffering and the poor. He helped procure a 40-room house where he took in destitute children, cared for them and taught them valuable trades. The railway was nearby, and the pastor worked with the management and got more rights and improved welfare for its workers. His work with children included creating a brass band with the children with a star. He used an old motorised charabanc, a carriage with benches, to take the children about. One day he was in the back when he fell from the charabanc and succumbed to his injuries. The railway used the same carriage from Martin Cabman's funeral and set up the train almost identically for people to pay their respects. Halifax Corporation Tramways got in on the action too. In 1907, tramway car number 64 was climbing the steep Pinehurst Road when it suddenly lost power and started rolling backwards. Conductor Walter Robinson was on the upper deck collecting fares when he noted the danger. He ran downstairs to apply the emergency brake at the back of the tram, while the driver desperately applied his brakes at the front. The busy road was full of people crossing as the train had passed and were stunned to see the tram bearing down back on them. Walter screamed to them to get clear and shouted at the passengers to hold on and sit tight. Despite both men trying to get control, the tram jumped the tracks, crashed into a shop, tore its roof clean off and ended up on its side. Walter and 2 passengers were killed instantly, while 2 other passengers succumbed to their injuries in hospital. It was said that if it was not for Walter's quick thinking and his warning calls, many more, both on and off the tram, would have been killed. He was honoured by the tramway with a special funeral with 3 double-deck cars for mourners and a special private car for the coffin. His work colleagues would be his pallbearers, and thousands turned out to give this hero the perfect send-off. Blackpool also honoured one of its workers with a tramway send-off. In 1911, Alexander Hollis was on duty as a tram inspector and was working at the Blundell Street depot, where he suffered an accident and passed away. It's not known what happened, but the tramway wanted to give him a tramway send-off. This would be the only one Blackpool would ever hold. The funeral was held on the 5th of January 1912 and started just a short walk from the tramway at Mr. Hollis's home. He was loaded onto the lower deck of tramway car number 5, which was decorated in black drapes and had a window removed just so that the pallbearers could load the coffin. The hearse was followed by the tramway car number 6, a double-decker tram that carried mourners. 2 other cars for staff followed, and almost every employee had turned out to pay their respects, and the public lined the route. Being taken by tramway on UK rails is one of the ultimate honours, and the National Tramway Museum was honoured to take not 1 but 2 of its senior members on their final journey. Richard Fairbairn was actually listed at being born at the tramway depot in Worcester. His father was a manager and his house was listed as company property. It were no wonder that he developed an interest in tramways. He joined the Tramway Society in the 1960s. The site at Worcester was commonly unmanned, so Richard bought a caravan and moved the static onto the site as a live-in security resident officer. He was made yearly president of the society in 1981 and was made vice president for his 90th birthday. When he passed in 1985, his coffin was carried onto tramcar number 166, which had been modified especially for the occasion. It was draped in black, and the mourners followed in 2 trams behind the cortege. It was driven from the depot to the main gate, where he was placed in a motorised hearse for the journey to the church. The second person to receive the honour was the late Winston Bond. He was an active volunteer from the get-go and worked his way to honorary treasurer. He donated over 11,000 books and documents and worked to become the head of the library. He helped give the tramways a paper history, so it was only fitting in 2008, when he passed, that Sheffield Works car number 330 was modified to take him on his final journey. The tramway funeral movement had a brief and limited success. By the time it had taken off, the rise of the motorcar were becoming apparent. With its popularity, the motorcar's owners demanded better roads, and the government were forced to listen. As each road was made better, hearses were more common, and by the 1920s, tramways offering funeral services were virtually non-existent. The movement of coffins on railways was deemed too impractical following the privatisation in the 1990s. However, many heritage lines offer services where ashes can be spread either on the line side or by the engine itself through its firebox. It's a common choice by many enthusiasts, as they themselves become the very part of the engines and the lines that they well and truly love.